I could not state that it had an influence on the university because I can't remember what years he was here. I use the expression Spanish Americans. I lived with the Amador family, as I told you before, my little boy and I. And I also spoke of the great distinction that their two sons achieved, and the great prejudice that the older one, Frank, encountered when he applied for a position on this faculty in engineering. I was thrown with President Corbett on several different social occasions and elsewhere. By then, people knew me well enough that to mention any sign of prejudice was like waving a red flag at the proverbial bull. I had made my stand clear long ago. So inasmuch as Dr. Corbett never introduced the subject, and inasmuch as I say there was the Spanish Americans on campus were going quite strong then. I don't know what he did to dampen their distinction. Well, those things can become very ugly, and the poor dear man is dead, and I would just simply stake my bottom dollar, and my bottom dollar is very bottom at the moment. Nonetheless, I would do that to assert that I don't believe he did them any harm, and I don't believe he was known as anti. I don't think he was known as that. I think I told you the other day when I was praising Hugh Milton that I would prefer not to comment on other presidents, because immediately when we do that, we get into comparisons. And whether we state them directly or not, people infer that this one is better than that one because of this or that. I should simply not want to do that. She's getting to be an old lady now. Isn't she in Washington State? Well, I think I told you that George Gardner graduated from Acadia College in Nova Scotia, which my French forebears founded. I'm half French. And when I came here, he was, of course, interested in meeting me. And I, in turn, found him a tremendously interesting human being. And his wife was a brilliant mathematician. They together, he founded PSL, of course, and she presided over it for years and years. He was, what shall I say? He had what to me is the British view of things, understatement, one who never thumped his own breasts, to breasts singular, he was a male after all, to cite his own accomplishments. But he did a tremendous amount for this university. Before we had a graduate school, we had a graduate committee. I was the only woman on it. In fact, there weren't many women beside me on campus at the time. And George Gardner was one where there were 4 of us, I think maybe 4. And in those meetings, I was the secretary as well as a full-fledged member of the graduate committee, as we were called. I learned a great deal about his philosophy of education, which was always in pursuit of the highest excellence. And though his realm was physics, wasn't it? Wasn't he a physicist? He was a great believer in that document to which I referred the other day in passing, John Henry Newman's The Idea of a University, which many colleges in this country used as kind of a handbook for what was called post-war planning. What should we do? Well, George Gardner, despite being a brilliant physicist, was committed to the idea of a liberal education. And he liked to point to the distinction which I cherish, which appears in that work of Newman's, the distinction between liberal and servile knowledge. Under servile knowledge, all the technical things would automatically be listed. Liberal knowledge was by Newman, by George Gardner, a possession which we value for its own sake. We do not pursue this with our eye on first a diploma as a passport to this job or the other and how much money we will get as a result. The statement is that the fruits of a liberal knowledge consist in a habit of mind. Now this goes way back to Plato. He was the first to say it in his great treatise on education in the Republic. Newman restated it for his century, and our century picked it up as an important thing in planning what we would do with course offerings when the men came home from war. And I did mention the other day the president then of MIT, who said that he thought we would have to make engineering there a 5-year course, because he wanted those people to have 2 solid years of the humanities to acquire this liberal knowledge. To me, the most important memory I have of George Gardner is that he was a champion of this great tradition, without which civilization, as it's been known in the Western world, will go right down the drain. They left almost immediately after his retirement. They went to Nova Scotia to live for a while. They often went up there on vacation. You see, that's where Acadia College is, and he loved Nova Scotia. And his health began to fail, and they went to New York City. I didn't see them after they departed from Las Cruces. No, I was not that intimate somehow, though I felt I knew him, and he knew me. We did not correspond. Well, since that is completely outside my line, I can't say I think about something that I'm ignorant of. Before you can express a valid opinion, you have to have some facts. I know it brought attention to this school. I don't know exactly the nature. Some of it was top secret, of the liaison with White Sands and the tracing in those early days at White Sands. Weren't most of the calculations made at PSL? That's right, and it also helped many students. The better students could find employment at PSL. Many of them worked there all through college. They had to keep up their grade point, of course.
We're getting some electrical static noise on the microphone.
Okay. I think the way I clipped the microphone onto your jumper here is rubbing a little bit. So it'll be okay.
I avoided those involvements. I was never a committee person. I really didn't have time either. I fled meetings like the plague, which would not be a popular activity today. You either know or I must have told you that I was Dean of Women for 8 years, and that was my contribution to the war effort. I wanted to be a wave, but I had a little boy, and they wouldn't take me. And through a series of circumstances, here I was, Dean of Women, and also full professor, teaching 15 hours, mind you, a week in addition. Now, those years, were a surfeit of meetings, of arrangements, of inescapable commitments. And when it ended, I heaved a sigh of relief and said, I'm going to concern myself with my true vocation, which is teaching. Well, the college was not alone in serving in loco parentis, as it was called. I had grown up in that tradition in, a student body of 30,000, and it was, just the way things were. It didn't at all shock me because it had been part of the stream, continuity, you see. I did find it a little unpalatable at times to have to enforce those rules. And my first act was to go round to the dorm, open the closet doors. The preceding Dean of Women had a list of don'ts that long, 20 or 25. I simply had them torn off every door and set up about 4 positive do's. I tried to cut it down to the minimum. You see, I'm a garrulous person. I've been a great talker, not compulsive. I'm not one that, just never allows anyone else a word, I hope. But when you go through life scattering these precious gems willy-nilly, you can't reach out and recapture them. I don't remember what those were, but they were certainly minimal compared to what was there before. And because I made them so few in number, and because the school was functioning in loco parentis, I made it clear from the outset that they were to be observed. And they were. If I, as an undergraduate, had moved into a room with all those things on the back of the closet door, I would have started scratching them off one by one as I accomplished them. I think it's a challenge to anybody. Don't you? When I left that office of Dean of Women, I left, period. I no longer involved myself with queries or concerns about the operation thereof. I think the greatest change came with intervisitation, whenever that started. Why wouldn't it? I think anyone with just stopping to consider office, certainly it would. Certainly. There have been all sorts of articles written about it, both pro and con. I believe that, somewhere in Shakespeare, don't ask me which play, is this line: there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the full leads on to fortune. Youth comes but once. Some people are fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go on to college, plus a desire, these are fewer in number of course, to take this opportunity of youth and to take from it all that's possible. I'm a great devotee, I mentioned that before I think, of Socrates barefoot in the streets of Athens with his students following him. They would follow him to the death. Now, no normal youth would brush aside the idea of gather ye rosebuds while ye may, for time is still a-flying. We have to gather the rosebuds, or we become pompous, pedantic pipsqueaks. I'm not brushing that aside. But I believe that the heart of anything that calls itself a university has to be the exchange between those who seek knowledge and those who seek to share it. And that when things are not merely encountered, but provided in the way of the temptation to wander knee-deep through the fading rosebuds, which fade even faster than youth itself. It can deeply affect the quality of what we have called a university education. I don't think you have to loiter in a girl's room for a number of hours in order to drink life to the full. When you should be preparing for tomorrow's exam or next week's term paper, you see, I don't think it's been a helpful thing. Now, its great supporters call it a learning experience, and they put that up in neon lights, a learning experience. All life is a learning experience, and it becomes forever a matter of priorities. Well, one idea, let's see, I didn't want to talk about him. Dr. Corbett, what may have been the one who introduced, was to make this a great university and to acquire for any vacancy that occurred the greatest person in this country. Now, the great people in the East were publishing, but they were also great teachers. They didn't justify their existence by the publication, in other words. Even though someone like George Lyman Kittredge, the great Chaucer person in this country, still today, though dead long time ago, his one work on Chaucer was great. He was known as the great, great teacher. George, what's his name? Of Yale, great teacher who became governor of Connecticut, William Lyon Phelps. He published, but he was known as a teacher. Now, when this idea of getting the best person in the world for any vacancy that occurred out here became a mandate, of course there had to be a PhD. Of course there had to be publications. And regrettably, it became so frenetic that this is not mere opinion. I have facts which I will not divulge. People on our campus took to copying the works of others without giving credit, just going and getting a book on this and a book on that and a book on the other and piecing them all together. The kind of thing that you would flunk an undergraduate flat for if you caught him at it. Now, please don't think that I'm saying that everybody who has published here has been in that group, but it has happened. And the works have been accepted and the people promoted. It's all, we get back to that great word priority again, don't we? And as PhDs proliferate, I'd like to know the quality of the PhD before I'd bow down and worship. I truly would. There's a big range there, you may be sure. For example, and this will sound like heresy, but we have a right to say certain things as we totter down the brink, or on the brink of senility. I hope I never get senile. On the other hand, now, to drop that thought, the English department is proposing a PhD in linguistics. If you want to investigate that situation, you'll find that the proposal was formulated and presented before they had anybody on the faculty capable of teaching this. You see, this is as false as hell. And I'm quoting, those aren't my words, but I like them. It's false. Well, I'm not evading your question. I'm going back to one of my favorite spokesmen, whom you may regard as an old fuddy-duddy, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who in his time was called the wisest American, friend and mentor of Henry David Thoreau. And in their concept of these things, though Thoreau has become more known to the public because of civil disobedience, of course, people know that and don't bother with the depths of his philosophic thought. Emerson said, and Thoreau's whole life exemplified, what a world this would be if every individual reformed himself. There is no use of talking about improvement of this institution or of that institution without each man looking into his own heart and achieving within himself the best toward which he aspired. I believe that if this would happen, and the posers who are here and there and everywhere were stripped of their artificial trappings and forced to face the reality of themselves, this would become a better place, just as it would become a better world. And therefore, those of us who feel alien in our own time, and God knows Thoreau was an alien, Emerson became so one period in his life, and so have others since. If the majority are absolutely against what we believe, was it Thoreau who said, or Emerson? I don't know. Make yourself a majority of one, and all is not lost as long as the individual clings to what he in his heart of hearts believes to be the best. Now, that's quite an undertaking. It's a lifetime. It would reform, improve everything it touched that we know of. You would have a body of people. This is ideal. It's an idea. It's utopian. Except that you and I and that little one there, each one of us can do it, you know. And if enough of us take fire, then we'll have a community of people who are real. That's what I meant when I said I'd like to see the posers stripped and tossed out. That sounds heretical, doesn't it?
We're getting that mic sound again.
Ah,
Okay.
I'm a problem.
I'm sure that's no news to you, is it?
No. No. The specifics flow from the general thing. You have to envision what this general thing is before you approach the specifics. That's servile knowledge. That's on the lower level. And what's happening in our society proves that point. I don't know the why of that. I do not.
I wish I had asked him.
No, I don't know why. I know where it is, I think, but I have stuffed things into this which are important to me and which get totally lost. I have kept files in my life. I've been responsible for lots of things, but in this strange environment where I am confined, I've had to do the best I could. Now it's a little thing. No, that was isn't it? This is dreadful. I think this is it. Yes. Those are the...
Would you mind reading it?
It's a very great thing, and a man should read it. He had a magnificent voice, and every time I read it, I hear his voice. I've never been good at reading aloud. I feel that it would do an injustice to this beautiful thing if I were to read it. Would you like to read it aloud?
Well, he wasn't a close personal friend of mine. I think somehow that lends more authenticity. I mean, I could have someone read it if you'd prefer not to, but it's that the dearness in which you hold his memory that. But if you would not feel comfortable in reading it because of your own.
Well, I feel it would do this beautiful thing an injustice if I were to read it aloud.
I understand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I made notes of any other questions that I wanted to ask you about. I thought maybe when I said, well, what would you like to talk about, you might have, but we did talk about a pretty wide range of things.
One thing I might toss in here, I was going back to one of your early questions about Dr. Corbett and his avowed feeling, alleged, not avowed, that he regarded the Spanish American as inferior. We were talking the other day about how blacks could not come on campus except in summer school. They were allowed to come and go to summer school. Now, I can't remember what year it was when they were first admitted as regular students. But I had a chap, oh no, I didn't have him in class. He came to know my son very well, Jethro Hill. Have you heard of him? And he used to pass through this house, go back to my son's room. They studied something together, physics or something. And I looked up the other morning on TV after some newscast, and here was Jethro, the most distinguished looking person. He graduated here with honors, and he's been elected commissioner in El Paso. And we've had such a roster of people of all colors, if I may say so, whatever color means. I just don't know that it means a blasted thing. Do you? Yes. Well, I was just thinking of Jethro Hill, who has distinguished himself. Wait, when did my son graduate? 59, 58, 59. 59 or 60. He's an impressive person.